Hello, this is a asynchronous video for social studies teachers on supporting emergent multilingual learners in either US History 8, US History 9, or NSL Government. So if you teach one of those three courses, you are watching the correct video. I'm Tiff. I'm going to be leading you through this video as well as some updates on EMLs in social studies classes. All right. So first off, our outcomes for these trainings are to process up-to-date messages on effectively teaching EMLs during content instruction. And then we're going to examine curriculum-aligned scaffolds that have been created specifically for the course that you teach, whether it's US 9, US 8, or NSL. Just some terminology. Emergent multilingual learner is replacing English learner or English as a second language learner to reflect the assets, the linguistic and cultural assets that learners bring. They're adding English to their repertoire, to their languages they already speak. And so that term, it just has a non-deficit look. We'll also refer to the services that these students receive as English language development as opposed to ESOL, right? So they're building their English proficiency. The RETA ELD standards have been updated in 2020. If you could click, you may click on the link in the title to access those updated standards. But those standards reflect 5 big ideas when teaching EMLs and supporting their ELD. One is equity of opportunity and access. So we can't wait for students to have English proficiency before they're involved meaningfully in classroom environments, right? It's sort of like they have to be building their English language at the same time as they're continually having meaningful participation. Collaboration among stakeholders, the content teacher yourself, ELD teachers, paraeducators, resource teachers is key to the success of these students, right? Nobody can work in isolation when supporting these students. We've got to work together as a team. Integration, language and the content need to be taught together, right? So if you're doing an activity on the costs and benefits of industrialization, you're going to need to teach those 3 vocabulary words to students while they're actually learning what those costs and benefits are. Another big idea is having a functional approach to language development. So we're focusing on the uses of language, which you can see in the center of this icon, right? Students are going to be narrating, arguing, informing, or explaining. And so we're teaching them how to use language for whatever the appropriate use is. So what you see here are the key uses of language in social studies. So what uses are students most asked to implement in a social studies classroom? This is the same whether it's for grades 6 to 8 or 9 to 12, but whatever slides you're looking at will have the correct link for the course that you teach. The most prominent are explaining and arguing. We see that very clearly in the common writing tasks. Informing is present, but not prominent, and then narrate to give sort of a sequence of events of what happened is somewhat prominent. And this is definitely a review. We've talked a lot about the language domains, which are now being called the modes of communication, listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And the We to Access test that students take every winter. They measure all 4 of those modes of communication, right? And some of these modes represent output versus input, right? Input is listening and reading, you're interpreting, and then output would be your expressive modes, right? Writing and speaking. And so we want to make sure that in classes, we're giving EML students the opportunity to practice all of these modes of communication, right? To further help them in their English language development goals. If you click on the phrase "this resource" in this slide, what's going to come up is a very handy look at the different English language proficiency levels. You'll see what students are able to do, what their reading, speaking, and writing sound like or look like for each level, and what are some scaffolds that teachers should be implementing for those students to make learning accessible for them. So I'm going to ask that you take some time. I'll pause the video. You'll take some time to look through this document, what students can do at that proficiency level, what teachers should do, and you can examine some speaking, writing, and reading samples for students at that level. And as you spend time looking through this resource, consider why it's important to understand what students are able to do at proficiency levels, at certain proficiency levels, and what that means for your teaching. All right, now that you've seen some general examples of what students can do and what the teachers should do to make learning accessible for them, we're going to ask that you again pause this video and take the time to watch this classroom example using a text called "Long Walk to Water," and focus as you watch this video on how the teacher implement some of the WIDA big ideas during instruction. What type of scaffolds or support does the teacher provide to ensure that EML students are able to access literacy instruction in this classroom? Now, in addition to the scaffolding ideas from the resource on the proficiency levels, there is a great resource here called the 9 Dimensions of Scaffolding that take a deeper and more wide and varied look at scaffolding. So open up this list and take a moment to read it over. And as you do, I want you to reflect on what are some of the things that you already do. And I'm sure that it's a long list, right? Modeling, questioning, these are key parts of a teacher's repertoire. And then think about which one of these might you want to continue, start doing, or do more frequently once the new school year opens. What might be some added areas that you can increase the frequency with which you use those scaffolding dimensions. So a review of all the instructional techniques for teachers. We've talked about, or we will talk about, reducing the essential content, right? Since things might take longer for EML students, we can focus on just what is essential and take out some of the content that maybe is not needed. And of course, in courses like US History 8 and NSL Government, it's going to be the assessment limit set by MSDE that will dictate the essential content, right? And what students absolutely need to know. The other thing we've been talking about is teaching academic language and vocabulary alongside the content. We've talked about having all the modes of communication in the class, providing structured opportunities to practice them. We know that before students dive into reading text, they often need to build their background knowledge, right? So they have existing knowledge to put new information into. And so some of the scaffolds that we'll look at will give tips for building background knowledge. Some of the tasks that are in the curriculum might need to be scaffolded, and students might need to differ in how they demonstrate their learning to make these tasks accessible. And then of course, something that we're very familiar with is scaffolding text, simplifying either the sentence structure, the vocabulary, adding more context or images to help students understand what is happening in those texts. And so here's just some examples of what scaffolding text can look like. We can excerpt, only select the portions that are necessary for the information that's needed for the inquiry. We can annotate the source by adding additional context or information about the source, such as, adding some vocabulary, front loading, adding images, or we can actually modify the text itself, right? By changing the language demands, changing the words that are used or the sentence structure to increase comprehensibility while still maintaining the meaning of the source. And which one of these you do, whether you do multiple things, is going to depend on the complexity of the text and on the English language development of the students that you're modifying the text for. All right, so now this is the part of the training where you're really going to dig in and examine the resources that have been created by teachers and curated by the Social Studies Office for EMLs in your specific grade level. This slide is, of course, geared to USA that you see in the video, but whatever slideshow you're looking at will have the course that you teach. And so for each of those 6 areas, you're going to examine the resource for EMLs and identify how the content has been reduced. What are some of the techniques used to teach vocabulary? What modes of communication are practiced in the resources? How is background built for students? What are some examples of ways that tasks are scaffolded as compared to the original task? And then how are the texts scaffolded again in comparison to the original? And so for each of these courses, you'll have a document that looks something like this. For NSL and US History 8, you'll have the MCPS objective. It'll list the MSDE assessment limit or vocabulary so that you know what is assessed. And then there'll be a description of what a teacher should do from those resources in the main curriculum, which are linked under the objective. So which part of the CIT are you using with EMLs? What different resources are you using? So I'll take you down to the first common instructional task. And you can see that there's vocabulary embedded, there's scaffolded versions of the sourcing graphic organizer, and then there's a speaking opportunity that's there for students, right? A structured speaking opportunity. And so, there's different resources. You'll spend time exploring them, getting a sense of them, and thinking about how you're going to use them this year. One of the items that we're looking at is really focusing on teaching vocabulary. And there's an essential word routine that we use in US History 8 and 9, where students are given the word, the definition, some images that visualize that word, some related terms, some example of usage, a non-example, and then they're putting this into practice with a speaking opportunity and a listening opportunity by talking about this word to a partner. So this is just an example for one word. We've created more of these, and of course the blank template is up here so that you could create this routine for any vocabulary that you are teaching. Another really useful strategy also from the reading with adolescents, the PACT strategy, is getting the gist. And this can be really helpful when you are trying to teach beginning steps of close reading, right? Just what is the main idea before you even get to evaluating the claims or the evidence or the strengths and weaknesses of the argument. And what's great about this is it really is a partner reading. That students are looking for the most important information. They're writing a gist statement, which is their summary or synopsis. And then they have the opportunity to share that with the partner and take turns sharing their gist statements or discussing it prior to writing the gist statement. So that will help them get to close reading, right? This is almost like the first step of close reading, the main idea comprehension. And you can see that, there are adapted excerpts. So this is the EML version. It's reduced. There's context. There's images to show who is speaking and what are the conditions that they're describing. So it's a lot less text heavy than the original, which I think we'll find here, right? So here's the original document, and there's a lot more solid text there and no image describing the conditions on the ship. So that's just one example. And then after you really dive into your resource document, then I invite you to think about these 3 questions and reflect on them in the discussion board. How are you going to implement the resources in your classroom? What impact do you think this will have on student learning? And then what else do you need to learn or do to effectively teach emergent multilingual learners in your course content? All right, and I want to just show our 9th grade US history teachers the version for Unit 1 for EML students. Again, you can see some similarities. There are no state assessment limits, so that middle column is devoted to language development. And there are, again, some vocabulary techniques and resources. The original CIT and the key objectives are in the first column. And then in the rightmost column are a list of created scaffolds for teachers, scaffold graphic organizers, activities. And What you see here under teacher created scaffolds is also like, these are the only parts of the CIT you do, right? So you don't do the complete CIT. Focus instead on just learning about the 2 waves of immigration, practicing a thesis, and then practicing sourcing, right? But with the caveat that you can postpone sourcing to the next CIT, right? One of the great things about this is the skills sort of build, and you can practice the skills with any content. So if you want to sort of only do one skill with each CIT, you can do that, right? So you could do sourcing when it comes to the new industries instead. And so using these resources and following just these components of the CIT is extremely helpful for reducing the content knowledge, right? That EML students are not going to do every little thing that is in the rest of the CIT. And then just to make things easier for you, and this is for all courses, the EML scaffolds for each unit will be linked to the course framework so that you can access it. And the Unit 1 resources are all ready to go now. And by August 1st, all the units for each of these courses will have the EML scaffolds resource document linked into the course framework. I'm going to show you the NSL government EML resource sheet. This is a little bit different from the others in that you have the MCPS objective, but the CIT is not linked in. And this is because the government curriculum is older. There's fewer common instructional tasks or resources. And so since it's the oldest one, it's also up for revision, but by only linking it to MSDE assessment limits, right, what you should do to accomplish each assessment limit, then it's not going to be outdated when MCPS changes its curriculum, right? Because these assessment limits will remain the same, and you have teacher-created resources for teaching each of these. And again, these are just resources for you. Sometimes multiple options are given from different EML teachers of NSL. And you don't have to use these, of course, if you already have some of your own, but it just gives you an idea and a starting point of some resources that you can use to teach each of the state assessment limits, right? And so again, these focus on teaching vocabulary, having scaffolded reading and tasks. And there will be a sheet like this for every single unit linked in to the NSL course framework. I hope that you find these resources helpful as you are planning for and implementing the curriculum with your students. Thank you so much for your participation in the module. Make sure to complete the survey on the next screen in Canvas to log your attendance and provide feedback about these modules. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the Social Studies office or your resource teacher. Thank you and have a good rest of the summer.